We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Hey everybody, it's Boysen, Hodgson. Welcome back to the Mankind Podcast, the podcast where we are setting out to prove that there is indeed more than one way to be a man, complicating simple stories about masculinity to bring all of the richness of who we are out in front of us. Today, I get to hang out with a guy who is, let me say, legendary in the Mankind Project. And Luke and I have not, this is Luke Entrup. Luke and I have not hung out in person. I started hearing about Luke from like the very earliest parts of when I came into the Mankind Project back in 2004. Here we are 20 years later. I heard about this dude, this guy. And so we're going to go into some of that. Luke is the founder of the Father-Son Connection Experience. He is a host of the top-rated podcast Crazy Wisdom, which you should check out. There'll be a link in the show notes. And he's a coach who helps others cultivate deep clarity and bold momentum in their lives. He coaches men who want to heal from divorce and bounce back from big breakups. That's a very B sentence. Welcome, Luke.
Oh man, Boysen, I am so thrilled to be here. Love what you're doing with the show and just so appreciate all the work you've done for so many years on this project that we care so much about, the Mankind Project. So yeah, super thrilled to be here today.
So let's go back a long time. How did you get into men's work? You were legendary as like the young warrior, one of the young warrior guys back in the day. Talk about your origin story.
Yeah, there was about a decade where I was always the youngest man in the room. And I learned a lot during that decade, let me tell you. Actually, I think probably the story for me actually starts earlier than when I entered into my first men's circle. I grew up a child actor. I was on stage and did modeling and was like very just kind of out like on a mission, essentially, at an early age. I was on my mission starting at age 9. And then at some point in my late teens, that was just no longer the thing for me to do. And I went into the flatlands. I for about 5 years, from about 17 until about 22. The world was pretty flat for me and didn't have a lot of meaning. And my father invited me to the Mankind Project and said, hey, there's this men's weekend that I did, and it was really impactful, and it might be something that might be useful for you. And so he actually staffed my weekend. I was 22 years old. This was in St. Louis in the year 2000. And it was a profoundly impactful experience for me. I really had this experience of walking in the doors on Friday night, a boy, and walking out very clearly a man on Sunday afternoon. And there is an experience on Saturday night around a fire where an elder presented me to the community. And that was the moment that I can very clearly say in my life, I became a man. And it really set me up for living a life of service to others and being connected to my heart and my power. And, as I said, I spent at least a decade just soaking in any sort of reflection and wisdom and honoring and advice that I could get from these badass men who were living bold lives and cared about, living something deeper than the default. And it really, really formed me deeply. So,
and thank you for that. Yeah, that's really cool. Saturday night. Welcome to it. So, hey, listeners, you might be 25 years old. You might be 65 years old. If you've never experienced the moment where you clearly, from the depths of your soul, understood that you were a man, maybe there's something here for you. maybe there's something here for you in that. You had some legendary impacts on the Mankind Project also. So in that first 10 years, as you were absorbing all of this wisdom, and I'm gonna also say, as you were disabusing older men of their projections onto younger men, right?
Oh, well, there is that as well. My goodness, were there some projections.
Yes. But, I think I was young. I was not that young. 2004, I was 31 years old. And that still meant that I was often the youngest guy in the room. Right. But I think that you and a few other men like you kind of became a touch point for this. Like, dude, stop projecting your shit onto me. I'm just a young guy. I'm in the struggle too. Don't do that. Yeah.
I mean, it's understandable, right? Like I was so blessed to have an initiation into sacred masculinity at an age that was pretty close to when, historically and traditionally, that's when it happens, right? From about 17 to 20 is when the people that live closer to the land and our ancestors, this is the time when they said, okay, you're now a man and this is what it means to become a man. So I had that at 22 years old. And so most men did not get that and have not gotten that. So there's a tremendous amount of feeling about that within men. And so, yeah, I got to hear all about all that feeling for many, many, many years about how lucky I was and how brilliant I was. And also, how fucked up the younger generation is and all the things. Right. So, but at the end of the day, for me, there's something developmentally at that stage where it's so much about healthy ego development, like a healthy sense of self. And to have so many elders and wise men and being surrounded by that, just filling me up with positivity and belief in myself and challenge and calling me out on my shortcomings, it really shaped me in a deep way. And one of the biggest influences was actually I connected with Bill Kauth, one of the founders of the Mankind Project, pretty early on, and he grabbed a collection of us. He, as Bill does, like friends of Bill, right? Like he does what Bill does, and he got like 20 or so, young men that were involved in men's work through the Mankind Project together with some mentors. I remember this very clearly. It was up in Windsor, Ontario. And he said, like, this training that's been developed, it could probably be a little better for younger men. Like it's times are changing since when we originally designed it. Are there some folks here, some guys here that can help us do that? And out of that, all the brilliance of Bill Kauth came a project that we later called called Beyond the Machine, and it was a training and a gathering started it for young men and eventually became for young adults around seeking deeper purpose, emotional healing, and integration work, but a heavy focus on mentorship. So bringing in some really great mentors to help these young folks, 18 to 30, really find their way in the world. And that had kind of a life of its own and had a whole chapter that was pretty impactful for some period of time and was always kind of in the Mankind Project ecosystem. And that for me was super impactful because it put me on this path of like really my work in the world, which is supporting people going deeper and leading rites of passage work and retreat. And so, there's one thing to do the deep emotional work ourselves. There's an entirely different thing when we start initiating others, or when we turn our eye into the world and start offering these experiences. So for me, this was in some ways even more impactful than my own initiation into a deeper way of being.
That I'm really curious, and this might be a side street, but I know that the Beyond the Machine kind of had a chapter, and then there was another generation, Skylar Cunningham and Matt Oren and Zvika Krieger and a handful of dudes like that, right? Who kind of picked that up and went into the Young Warrior Training Adventure, the YWTA, which got blessed and hasn't. What's happening now? I feel sadness as I think what I'm sensing in the Mankind Project.
Yeah. I still send young men to the Mankind Project. I still think that the technology works, right? But I will tell them, you're going to be around a lot of middle-aged men, and but the technology still works, right? And there's something about the community aspect of being a young man that still has never fully taken hold within the organization. But the actual experience, the purity of the experience, and the experience, honestly, of being a younger man going through in a place that reveres elders and reveres the role of honoring and blessing is a profoundly impactful experience still to this day for young men. So I send clients and friends and, I send people that are younger all the time. So I do think there's a place for it, but it's the community piece of like a tribe of younger men that still is, I don't know that we still haven't figured that out.
Fully figured that. Well, I sense something.
Yeah.
I also would say that I sense some arising, right? I sense some arising energy from some of the men that I know in MKP who have this kind of passion. Because what I heard is Bill Kauth, right? Bill Kauth, in the way that Bill Kauth sweeps people together, right? And so I'm gonna keep my eyes out for who's the person that's going to be bringing these men together and wrapping his big arms around them to do some of that. Cool. I'm going to shift outward into the culture. So you're now out there making rites of passage happen and mentoring others and coaching others into how this happens. What are some of the things that you see happening out there for young people today, especially our boys, that are maybe different than 20 years ago? Or what do you see happening out there that calls you?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about isolation, right? We're in a culture of isolation is really the great sorrow of our time. This is the thing that I think hopefully we make some improvements around. But I think when we look back about what happened on our watch in our lifetime, it's going to be the kind of the breakdown of the social fabric and social connection and social capital, right? So my work is very much about reestablishing deep, meaningful connections through rites of passage. And obviously at the heart of that is technology and screens and just the social media algorithms and the amount of attention that's being sucked from real life interaction and connection and being just drained into screens, right? And of course, like, I'm not saying all technology is bad. I think we can agree that there is absolutely a role for it. But when we look at when I look at boys, particularly, so I work primarily with boys 10 to 14 and their father figures. It's like screen addiction, attention deficit disorder, like all the things that go with a disconnection from each other and from the natural world. I think we can trace most of it back to relationship to technology. Yeah. And so, I think this is, what's the solution to a disconnect from ourselves, disconnected from the earth, disconnected to deeper meaning? What's the solution? It's to unplug, go into the wild, get around a fire, and let nature do its thing on us. And that inevitably lifts some of the distraction and the isolation to a point where we can drop in deeper.
Let nature do its thing on us. Yes, very well said. As a dad of teenagers, help me, Luke Entrup. You're my only, no, not, I almost dropped into Star Wars there. I won't. Yeah. So what are some steps in terms of practical stuff, like separating our children from these devices for any meaningful length of time, do you have strategies that you play out to do that?
Yeah. I mean, there's the day-to-day kind of struggle that, in my house, we have time boundaries and, screens aren't available during the school week and, and I have a landline. I mean, it's like, I've gone to kind of drastic measures here. My son got a CD player for the holidays. So, we're really trying to put some boundaries around it, but, there's the blocking and tackling day to day of just like making sure we put a bit of a bubble around it. But I think the more interesting and the more impactful thing that any parent can do is really committing to some time throughout the year where we snap our children out of their everyday reality and we take them into the beauty and the wonderment and awe of the natural world. And in these places, we don't need to be so rigid about the screens or no screens, but just to take them out into the mountains, into a park, into the beach, into the forest. And so for my family, that often looks like we backpack quite a bit in the summer. And, I asked my son, he's about to turn 13. I've asked him for the last 5 years, like, what's one thing you would need from me in order to feel like you're getting what you need from me and that we're connected? Every single year, his answer has been, I need a week of backpacking alone, one-on-one with you in the mountains. That has been his answer since he was like 8 years old. And I think there's just, while every kid's answer may be slightly different, there is something about the snapping them out of just the rut of the life that they're living and showing them something new and wondrous. And when we include being in the natural world, being out off the grid, nature becomes its own character, right? It becomes a character in the story of the week that we're having. We will see things, unexpected things. We will face danger. We will face delightful surprises. We will be reinvigorated by cold mountain water. We will be surprised by a rattlesnake. We will be our breath taken away by how vast the cosmos is at night. There's things that happen that become their own character that then broaden the child's understanding of who they are and their role in the world. And, fundamentally, it's like we're also training towards more fortitude and strength and resilience. And again, in this world we're living in, this wasn't such a strange or, revolutionary move to go backpacking for a week 20, 30, right. 50 years ago. Now it's like, that's not the world we're living in, but it's actually pretty easy to do. Even if it's not backpacking, maybe it's just going on a trip to some other place. It's exposing the children to something new, something novel, something that will take them out of their myopic, everyday, self-centered point of view and broaden their understanding of who they are.
Adventure. Yes. Bringing them to adventure. And as you were telling that story, and it also forms the basis, I'm just recognizing in myself, also forms the basis of my warmest heart open memories of my kids, right? Walking in Muir Woods, in your neck of the woods, right? Walking in Muir Woods with my then 16-year-old. Like, they resisted and resisted and resisted and resisted until we got out on the trail, right? And took the walk and seeing that. Yeah. And beat times at the beach. And all of that. Yeah.
Boysen, your response here is, I've kind of told that story on many podcasts and to many people, and pretty much there's two responses. Everybody says what you said, or they say, my fondest memory of my father was our trip we took through the mountains when I was 12 years old, or the look on his face when I caught my first fish in the stream at the, it is like core memories. Right. And so, it's easy to forget this and get distracted into our daily rut, but it's, in my belief, it's fundamental.
Yeah, I've got both. Yeah, I've got both of those. There's a place called Stillwater Reservoir in the Adirondacks, which is canoe camping. You have to actually pack out a canoe and camp, move out. And yeah, I have those memories of childhood, like from that. Nice. Yeah, fascinating.
Hey, Boysen.
Brandon, what's happening, man?
Mate, I'll tell you, little one, my daughter, she is becoming more and more her, which is amazing. I'm just eating it up. But when I don't want to eat it up is in the middle of the night, 4 a.m, when she's trying to skip naps and I've got a lot of things to do. That's when things get a little tough.
So what are you leaning on? I mean, how much coffee are you drinking these days?
Well, mate, you know me. I'm certainly not. I don't like the vices. You know, you've been in the health space for a while, and I get a little bit too hooked on those things. So I'm pretty grateful that we had the folks at Magic Mind reach out to provide us and the audience some value with their Magic Mind drink solution. And dude, I can tell you, it is blowing my mind.
What's it doing for you?
Well, mate, I think the biggest thing is sustained energy. That's what I need. I need to have the same energy at 10 a.m. as I do need at 2 p.m. But when the energy dips and I've still got work to do and she's crawling all over me, screaming in my ear, that is when I need to be able to push through. And yeah, so I'm not getting the dips. And unlike coffee, I'm sleeping at night, which is amazing.
Yes, the ingredient thing. So that's me too. I've been a coffee dude for a very long time. And when I get into these spaces where I'm just working, and I get too much into the coffee, I end up frazzled and stomach achy and jittery. What I'm seeing with Magic Mind is like, I've reduced the amount of coffee I'm actually drinking in the morning, and Magic Mind boosts the focus without all the coffee downside. I think has been really good for me. And yes, the sleep thing, man, there's some ingredients in this that have totally helped my sleep.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, because you're getting the caffeine from matcha, which is an extended release caffeine as opposed to like an intense rise then dip. It's got all the fancy mushrooms that, you know, everyone's taking these days, including ashwagandha, which gives you that más fuerte kind of energy. And and fortunately for us, they've offered us a great discount that us and you, the listeners, have access to get 56% off your first subscription and 20% off a one-time purchase with the unique discount code MANKIND. So if you go to magicmind.com/mankind, you get access to this discount. And like us, you get to enjoy this sustained energy, that más fuerte energy. I can take that into a couple places.
So check it out.
Yeah. And I need to get my wife to stop stealing mine, which would be great.
So you are doing it there where you are. I know of, and I'm grateful and I'm excited, and it lifts me up to know that, you know, there's the Boys to Men organization, and there's Journeyman Triangle, and there's the work that you're doing, and there's, you know, we can list all of these organizations who are doing powerful work in rites of passage with young men. What do you hope to see? What would you like to see? What do you see out there that could bring this bigger in terms of reimagining the importance of these connections, reimagining the importance of snapping ourselves out, as you've said a couple of times?
Yeah. Right. So, great question. I had our buddy Frederick Marks on my show, Crazy Wisdom.
Cool.
Right. And, you know, Frederick, an MKP guy and someone who's deeply committed to the work of Rites of Passage for Boys. Yes. And he said this zinger on my show that I just loved, which he said, you know, this is a 200-year project that we're on. And if we can imagine a world where over the next 200 years, we continue to build and grow the capability and the opportunity for every boy to have a meaningful rite of passage into manhood. Could you imagine the world we would be living in, right? That if every boy had a clear understanding of where he comes from and what he's stepping into, what does it mean to be a healthy man who's connected to his heart and his power? a man who has one eye out in the world and one eye in his own heart, and is surrounded by a community or a tribe of other men. What type of world would that be? I think a lot of the challenges that we face culturally would dissipate, right? And so, yeah, at this point, we're really taking the long view. These ceremonial rites of passage done in community with mentorship, they were lost, as we all know, right? The chain was broken. There was a time when most men on the planet had them, and with industrialization and urbanization, these things have been lost. And so we are the ones that are beginning the reintroduction in the Western world. And it's a long process, right? I was blessed to be, initiated at an early age. And so now we're on to generation 2. And if we can imagine what this looks like over time, that's the world I want to live in. That's the world I want to at least attempt to build as long as I can. Yeah. And there's something distinct about, if we talk a little bit about the elements of what do we mean by rite of passage. It's one thing to like go on a backpacking trip with your dad, that's kind of a rite of passage. It's an entirely different thing to join in a community with a shared experience that includes some of the elements that we know very well, right? A separation from the known world, putting all the cell phones in a bin, descending into being asked to look at, our past and our pain and our hurts, and then facing some part of ourselves through an ordeal. There's some other elements, right? So I'm mapping out the hero's journey, which is, just so fundamental to this type of work, right? There's other elements though, right? It's best done in community, best done. If we look at what is a rite of passage, it's moving from one way of being into the next, right? And so there needs to be some understanding of who are we becoming? What are we stepping into? And so some education and kind of framing around healthy masculinity, healthy power. And then the work that I'm doing, there's really kind of two major transitions for boys on their path to manhood, right? The first is around 10 to 14. Bill Plotkin writes about this a little bit, right? 10 to 14 is the transition from childhood into adolescence. And this is about beginning to have mastery in one's body, beginning to feel part of the tribe. So this is why sports teams blow up around this age, band, for me, it was the theater, like some place of belonging where we get really good at something. And for my son, that's mountain biking. My daughter, it's the theater. And, that's that stage, right, where there's beginning to be an assertion of independence. But they're still children, right? They're in their adolescence. There's another rite of passage that I think we all know much more about, which is 17 to 20. That's the passage into manhood, from adolescence into manhood, right? And my work's focused more on the first one, which is a meaningful transition into adolescence. So at that point, there's also all sorts of stuff we can do around changing bodies, puberty, consent, sex. So we do a lot of that on kind of our final day on our events around just setting up the conversation with a sex educator and then sending the boys out on long hikes with their dads. So,
and these are things that we have, in the absence of rites of passage that are kind of blessed and held in communities, like they either disappear completely or, we have cohorts of parents out there kind of expecting schools to fill in for these, or trying to get church to fill in. And there's some ways in which, that's good. And other ways, not so much. Yeah.
Better than nothing, right? Yeah, better than nothing. I mean, my experience was the Catholic Church had a program called In God's Image, right? And we got the sex ed through the church of all places, which in hindsight, it had some serious limitations, right? So, our approach with that is just to take more of a sex positive point of view and, kind of being accepting of whoever someone is becoming as they begin their sexuality begins to come online.
Yes, respectfully embrace. So just to squeeze back into this, Frederick Marx, I'll put this in the show notes, Rites to a Good Life, Everyday Rituals of Healing and Transformation by Frederick Marx has a whole bunch of writers who you know, some of the other names that we haven't mentioned: Michael Meade, Starhawk, Robert Moore, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, if you're not familiar. Great book. Go check that out. And I got to get Fredericks onto the podcast again. It's been a while since he and I have recorded a conversation. So
yeah, he did a bang up job of just really pulling together all the major thought leaders around rites of passage and creating a kind of a meta arc or a meta narrative around rites of passage. Just can't recommend it enough. It's wonderful. And yeah, check out Frederick's work for sure.
Long arc, a 200-year project. Yes, that's good. So what do you get from doing this? In doing this work, this is the heart story, right? Let's make everybody's hearts explode with love and joy and gratitude. When you're working with boys and going through these processes and building these communities, what are some of the things that we get out of this?
Oh man. Yeah, that's why we do it, right? So, for my work, I've really focused on the connection between the father and sons. Like I mentioned, the later initiation into manhood, it's not really a place for the father to initiate. I mean, my dad was there for mine, but he was respectfully distant, right? Which is appropriate, right? And we see that in the Mankind Project a lot, right? Where if a father's present, he gives his son quite a bit of distance because that's developmentally appropriate at that stage. In the earlier stage, it's very much about deepening the bond between the father and son so that the father is online as the boy is becoming a man. And hopefully what happens is the father is one of the people that the boy turns to as things start to get pretty crazy in the teenage years, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I just have these beautiful pictures in my mind. Sometimes we do this retreat at a place that's on Cobb Mountain in Northern California, and it's like the water coming off of the mountain is like maybe a half a degree above freezing. And it's really cold. And I just have these beautiful pictures of fathers and sons jumping into the cold water together and like doing it as an act of bravery and facing some sort of discomfort together and coming out like with a sense of invigoration and deep connection to themselves. I've had so many great conversations with parents afterwards, right? And one of my favorites was one of the moms called me and she's like, I need some help. So my son comes back and says, now he's on the path to being a warrior. And he says that he should have some more independence and that he should have some more freedom about where he goes after school and who he's hanging out with. and I had to chuckle and just say, that's not exactly what we were teaching on the weekend. But it points to this thing about the stage they're in, which is there is a beginning to like find some independence and some freedom and really taking the kind of the locus of navigation off of the parents and begin to internalize that and let the internal guide begin to really come online. And so that's just kind of a delightful, funny story, but I think it speaks to what's happening for these boys, which is we really go into some warrior practices and we talk about being on the path of training as a sacred warrior and what that means. And there's just something kind of deep in our DNA that anytime you just start talking about it with boys, their eyes light up and they pay attention and they lean into the practices we do around light martial arts or meditation and jumping into cold water. And to me, it's just a sign that this is in our DNA. Like we need to belong. We need to have a sense of belonging. It is like a survival mechanism. We're hardwired for it. And when we feel so isolated and disconnected, it erodes at the human soul. So when we start to reintroduce this, there's something about the health and vitality and the kind of just general life force comes back online, and you can see it in their eyes, the boys and their fathers, right? And to me, there's not anything much more important we could be doing than reestablishing deep connection to ourselves and to the earth and the people we share this life with. So that's why I do it.
That's why I do it. Okay. for some reason, I keep coming across as the like, there's this kind of negativity, but I want to explore it with you, right? So I'm Gen X.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a late millennial?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
No, I'm
You're
Gen X by 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
78.
So
yep.
we were raised by boomers, and the Gen X, I was certainly a latchkey kid. I was certainly like, all of that left to go wild on my own. And then we became parents, and the whole meme about helicopter parenting came to exist from us Gen Xers who were left on our own a whole lot. And then we overcompensate. How should we as Gen X parents be orienting ourselves? There's a growing up mechanism, I think, that our children force us into. What do you see in the dads that you're working with?
All right, man. Let me put on my public health hat for a minute. So in a previous life, I was I studied public health and social science research. So let me just give you a little bit of that for a moment. It's maybe not the sexiest way to have this conversation, but I think it's good to have it in database conversation, like
facts and data. Let's do that.
Right? Yes. Research. What does social science research say about this? So there was this meta-analysis that was released maybe like 3 months ago that looked at what they call, I believe the phrase they use is independent mobility in children, meaning how much freedom do they have to move around their community. And the higher the independent mobility, the dramatic reduction in childhood mental health diagnoses and issues. Meaning that helicopter parenting, according to this meta-analysis that looked at like many, many studies around this, helicopter parenting and this kind of hypervigilant controlling parenting style is actually impacting our children's mental health. Now, obviously there are other factors, but the statistical analysis shows that this is a factor. Helicopter parenting is not working for our children's mental health, right? So there are other factors, right? Community safety and how, car, at least in America, that's just such a car culture that there's challenges there, right? But when we look at it through the lens of mental health, it's pretty clear that children need to find their own sense of independent mobility. And if we look at kind of just in general, childhood health and crime statistics from the 1980s to now, you will see a decline. That's not what the media is reporting, because the media is in the business of selling commercials. Fear sells commercials, but it's actually safer to be a child in a community now than it was in the 1980s, right? But the media would have us believe something else, right? And so the point being, my approach has been as a parent and encourage others, to really to focus on safety and find appropriate boundaries. But my kids, like my son, he has a bike, he rides it everywhere, he rides to and from school. We have boundaries about when he needs to be home. We have boundaries about what to do when something fishy happens, if he encounters, somebody that he has a bad feeling about. We talk a lot about that, about just getting out of a situation, even if your spidey sense goes off a little bit, just immediately vacate. And but to really encourage independence, and the data supports this.
Listen up. Yes. No, I am happy to have you engage that public health brain at any time, and thank you for bringing that. I think that was really good. So what does that mean on a like real day-to-day level? So I got some of what that means for you and your son getting out there in the world. I'm leading. What am I trying to say here? Parents need to start doing their own shadow work on this stuff.
Yeah.
In order to mature ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's an internal dimension to this, right? About our own fear of losing our children, or our children being harmed, or our need to control them, or our need to have them be a certain way. There's a lot of deep personal reflection work and shadow work and integration work that we could do around that. we see this a lot on with the father-son work I do about the expectations that fathers place on their sons and the gap between who they are and who they want their children to be. And it's, there's like a delusion that we can get into as parents about wanting to see someone that's not actually who our child is. And right. So really doing the deep work to close that gap. I think that's part of it. I think you're naming something super important there. Great thing to bring to your I group, right?
Right.
And your therapist. The other piece of this is to have the conversation with the kids, right? And just set up the boundaries, because it's not that they should it's unfettered, just free reign. A free range kid needs to have some expectations about when to come home and what's safe. And so really figuring out what that means for you and your community. So for example, with my son, before he rides on a new route, I go with him, right? So we work with a personal trainer. The personal trainer just moved. He loves to ride his bike for his appointments with his trainer. He moved to a new place. Shortly later today, him and I are going to get on a bike together, and we're going to ride, and we're going to check out the route and figure out how to safely cross the roads and all of that. And then he'll be free to do it. That's an example.
Go with it being alongside, right? And I guess the visual that occurs to me is that the healthy thing to do is we go from, literally carrying to kind of holding their hands as they learn to walk, to being in front of them or behind them, kind of moving them along, to side by side with them in this exploration, in this new exploration.
Yeah. And, when we look at it from a developmental psychology perspective, we are their super ego, right? We're the voice that lives within them, especially at this age, around what's right and wrong and what's safe and dangerous. And so it's important that we are kind of riding along for some period around that.
Nice. What are we missing? What are we missing in our conversation so far? Where have we not gone?
Oh, great question. Let's see. I think that when I think back about some of the most impactful moments around rites of passage, maybe I could just point to a couple of other ingredients, right? Around what's because whether people come, they do something with me, they do something with Journeyman Triangle or Boys to Men, there's places that we can take our boys to help them have these experiences. There's some key ingredients and elements. And I mentioned a few, but I think there's some other ones, right? And one of them is ceremony and ritual, right? That there is a moment to actually honor the passage, and I talked about this in my experience of the Mankind Project, right? Being around a fire and how ancient and powerful that is. And so for us, we do the same thing. I've always had this picture of when my boy hits a certain age and, he starts to hit puberty, I had this picture in my mind of gathering around 5 or 6 of the dudes I trust the most, right? My ride or die guys that I think are living the life that I would want my son to learn about being a man, right? And gather around a fire and have a conversation about what does it mean to be a good man in this world today? What does it mean to, again, have an eye out in the world and do big, bold things and have an impact while also being aware of my impact on others and having one eye in to be able to understand the depths of my own heart. And so that's what we crafted, right? Is a ceremony around a fire with boys and men to say, this is what it means to be on the path of becoming a warrior, to becoming a good man in the world. And wow, pretty magical times in that. So ceremony and ritual, I think, is really, really important. And we also just every day we send the boys out with their dads for at least an hour and a half with no agenda. We might give them a few questions to ask each other. And this goes back to the thing that, Robert Bly wrote about, or maybe I heard him talk about it way back in the day. I can't quite remember, but he has this thing where he talks about the feminine in each of us really feels connected in a circle, sitting in a circle and processing in that way and looking eye to eye. And the masculine in each of us connects best by walking side by side in the forest. Right. And so there's something, again, like kind of baked into us that there's a deeper way of connecting that doesn't have to be like looking at each other across from the table, that we can be on a journey together in a beautiful place. And in some ways, that is the deepest form of masculine connection. And that's certainly been the case for me, both with my father and my son and my buddies. Something about moving through the world, and sometimes that happens in complete silence, and I can't imagine being more connected than a quiet walk in the forest with my boy or my father or my friend. So we bake that into what we do as well.
And I recently had opportunity to interview Douglas Gillette again, and talking about the integration of the masculine archetypes and the integration of feminine and masculine within each of us and all of us, and not limiting ourselves by any one direction. And our last conversation was about spirituality and ritual. Kind of, there's an invocation of something, right? And I heard you say the vastness of the universe when we look up at the sky. Talk a little bit more about kind of the invitation to the spiritual through this kind of work.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Maybe the most important question, right? First of all, in my experience, wonderment and awe are a choice.
Nice.
They're a choice I make. Right. And that choice becomes easier to make when I've faced my own pain and my own sorrow and my own self-loathing and my own shadows and the way that I've hurt others and myself. Right. The more I've metabolized the pain of the past, the easier it is to choose to look at a moment, the look in my lover's eyes, or the enormity of the universe, or the wind moving through my daughter's hair. And I can look at that and see the magic in that moment. Our hearts get layered. And when we don't deal with the pain of the past, when we don't deal with our own resentment and our own, the ways that we were hurt and we've hurt others, the capacity for our heart and our spirit to feel those moments becomes numb, becomes concretized. Those layers just keep adding up, right? And so if we want to choose to live a life of wonderment and awe, it requires a ferocity to face our own demons and face our own pain. There's also a piece around it for me that it's a practice. And there's a training of the mind and the body that will avail myself to a connection to something greater than myself, right? And this is where there's a great importance upon daily practices, so that I retrain my habitual patterns and I strengthen my capacity to go deeper. David Data writes about this, right? He talks about it through the lens of the body is like both a receiver and a transmitter, right? Our capacity to receive and transmit consciousness is based in our ability of how steady and how deep of our breath can be and how strong our body can be. And that doesn't happen without practice, meditation, yoga, training, strength training, whatever it is, flexibility training, if we're not tending to the vessel, right? So for me, that choice, there's times in my life when it's become harder to reach wonderment. It's become harder to see the magic, right? And it oftentimes requires a fierce will to pull ourselves out of the gravitational pull of habitual patterns and the pain of the past. And this is where rites of passage is so important, right? Snapping us out of our habitual patterns, putting us in deep discomfort. This is where the Mankind Project is just a masterful offering for men to shake them out of the layers of pain, resentment, and confusion, delusion that get put on top of our heart. Once that heart is free and liberated, then we have all the capacity that we need to be deeply connected to spirit.
This is not a retreat. Yes, that's it. That right there it is. Conscious suffering, right, and the choice. So layer right with that. Now, under wonderment and awe, that was beautifully stated. Known and unknown, and paradox, right? Because it seems like that's another place where rites of passage lead us into, I trust the man who says when he doesn't know. I trust the man who can sit in his not knowing about things, right? And that's like something that we acquire through rites of passage, I think.
Yeah, rites of passage and training, to have the mental flexibility to see paradox and to be wrong and not have it be personal. For me, obviously, like the greatest teacher around all of this is just the natural world. It's there's a humility that happens when you sit under a redwood tree, or you try to build a stone bridge over a stream that just the water won't stop coming. There's a way in which we learn a lot about paradox and flexibility and the mysterious by just immersing ourselves in the natural world. For me, this has meant like I literally need to be off the grid for about a month a year, not all at the same time, but just as part of my practice, to have the mental flexibility that you're pointing to. I just need to unplug, right? So this will be, a week with my boy, a week with my buddies, a week with my partner, and roughly a week in solitude.
Thank you. There's a piece of advice. Unpack that one. Talk to parents, talk to moms, talk to dads out there as we're kind of getting toward the end. What do you want moms and dads to hear about their 10 to 14-year-olds?
Yeah. I mean, there's this thing, my dear buddy Cliff Berry, who, brought shadow work and kind of refined some of the work that happens at the Mankind Project, right? The deep shadow work and shadow integration work. He says this thing that is just always, it just always rings my bell as a parent. And his point is that all that children really want is the loving presence of their parents, and they will do just about anything to get it, right? And all the maladaptive behaviors, all of the boundary pushing, all of the moments of deep connection and magic with parents and children, it's based in the children's need for loving connection, and the day-to-day, I think our day-to-day lives at times are working against that, right? It's just human nature, the habits that we get into and the frenetic culture that we live in and all of the distractions that we talk about. I guess if I have one message for parents of 10 to 14-year-olds, it's to find a way to have some sort of regular mindful communion with your children, right? Sometimes this takes drastic measures to snap, not just them, but us, snap the family, the relationship out of the mundane. And that's when we can have these moments around a fire where we look each other deeply in the eyes, and whether words are said or not, there's just a knowing that I am with you. I got you. I would do anything for you, that the children can really feel that. And sometimes it's hard to do that on a Tuesday after band practice while you're cooking dinner. So, I think it's just important as parents that we find the way to do that. The children, that's their sustenance. Of course, we feed them food, but we also really need to feed them that loving presence.
There you go. How would you like people to find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so we've got this exciting project, the Father-Son Connection Experience. We're doing weekend rites of passage work. We're also doing a backpacking trip, like a 6-day backpacking trip in the Cascades this coming summer. That's at fathersonconnection.com. And reach out to me directly if you'd like more information. And then about anything else that I do, people can find me at lukeentrup.com.
lukeentrup.com and the fathersonconnection.com. Luke?
Father-Son Connection Experience.com.
Oh,
I'm sorry. No, you said that right.
Connection.
You said that right. Father-Son Connection,
which is the host for
yes.
the Father-Son Connection Experience, a rite of passage
right.
for boys and
That's
their
right.
father
That's right.
figures.
You should be in marketing.
I ought to be in marketing. Yeah. I'll think about that. It's been really fun to hang out with you and get to know you a little bit better. And go find out. Go find Luke. Meet the man, the myth, the legend for yourself. And wow, do whatever it takes to snap your family out of our routines to connect and give our kids what they most desire in the world, loving connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Boysen. Love what you're doing, and so appreciate your service to this thing we love so much.
Thank you. All right.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. And I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us. It happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.